Alright, so today we're going to be taking a look at the EVGA GTX 1080Ti Founders Edition because I haven't gotten my hands on any of the cool new custom cooling solutions. So essentially you're going to be seeing a shroud that is exactly the same as the Titan X Pascal, and we're going to be putting both of those head to head. So we're basically just going to be seeing which one has the most GPU horsepower, and it's some pretty interesting stuff, so definitely stick around. To start things off, we're going to talk about the test bench, which is going to be an i7 7700K, overclocked to 4.8 gigahertz, mated to an MSI Gaming M3 Z270 motherboard, and all of the software and OS is running on an M.200 drive from BioStar. It's a 256 gigabyte over SATA, not NVMe. Memory is going to be the Kingston HyperX Savage, clocked at 2400 megahertz, and we have a total of 16 gigabytes of it. The power supply is a Thermaltake 850 watt gold rated power supply and should be enough to power everything that we are going to be throwing at it. Taking a look at the card itself, like I said, it's pretty much exactly the same as the Titan X except in silver, so in all the benchmarks the bars are going to be in black or silver to make it easily readable for you all so you can tell which card is being tested. And that's going to be important because everything's pretty close and pretty tight, and both the Titan X Pascal and the GTX 1080Ti have the same power requirements with an 8-pin and a 6-pin PCIe. And then if you roll around to the outputs, there is a difference here in that the new 1080Ti, at least the Founders Edition, does not have a DVI port. It's only going to have DisplayPort and HDMI, but again, at this kind of price point where you're talking about the $700 and up, you're probably not going to be running a DVI panel, so I think I'm okay with that. I know in the past I've kind of complained about it, like on the RX 480 and the RX 470, but to give you an idea there, that's because those cards most likely are still going to be being bought for panels that are only running DVI. It's a lot stronger of a likelihood. For example, you can get a pretty cheap BenQ TN panel with pretty good rates for pretty cheap that only has a DVI port, and I think that matches up with something like the GTX 1060 and the RX 480 or RX 470 quite well. For things like the 1080Ti and the Titan X Pascal, however, it's a lot more likely that you're going to be running a 4K panel or a very high refresh rate panel of some sort, and most likely you're going to be using the DisplayPort and maybe HDMI 2.0 if you're going out to like an HDR TV, which I do, so that could be a common thing, and you definitely don't want to drop the HDMI yet at this point. The last visual difference is going to be the box that it came in, and I did just want to point out that it's not near as cool as the Titan X, so if you guys want to have that awesome unboxing experience, definitely check out the Titan X. You know, spend $600 more. $500. Okay, sorry, I overstated that. Spend $500 more to have a better unboxing experience. Yeah. Or find somebody with a Titan X Pascal box and put your 1080Ti in there and then unbox it, because they're essentially the same card. Let's go ahead and hop in and talk about the benchmark. Starting off with Firestrike, you'll see that we only beat out the 1080Ti with the Titan X Pascal by about 200 points. And a really interesting note here is if you go down to the combined test, the 1080Ti actually comes out ahead. Now, we did hear that this is probably due to the changes they made with the memory, and it's not enough, however, for me to go ahead and say either way. At this point, you're seeing below 5% difference on all of the tests for Firestrike, and that's probably within margin of error. The next synthetic benchmark is going to be TimeSpy, which will be utilizing, of course, the DirectX 12 API as well as the 1440p resolution. If you hop into here, you'll see that the Titan X Pascal once again comes out on top albeit by just a few percentage points or less than a percentage point. Here though, we do see that the CPU test was winning by a tad, and that's something to note because that means that for whatever reason the CPU was performing slightly better for the Titan X test than it was for the 1080 Ti test, and that means that once again this is probably all within margin of error, and it's safe to say that both of these cards are essentially the same. Finally, the last synthetic test is going to be the GPU Pi, and it's going to be the CUDA, of course, because if we use the CPU then it wouldn't matter. And we'll see here that the 1080 Ti comes out ahead by about, what, 0.3 of a second? Yeah, so not by much, probably within margin of error. The 1080 Ti is essentially a Titan X Pascal. But what about gaming, you say? Well, I decided to take a look at two of the most, what would you call them, controversial benchmarks currently out for Ryzen versus the 7700K, as well as just some of the most demanding ones, and we're going to have 1080p, 1440p, and of course 4K. Starting out with Deus Ex Mankind Divided at 1080p with ultra settings. This does mean that we don't have any multi-sample anti-aliasing going on here. We had a max FPS of 128.7 on the Titan X Pascal and 128.4 on the 1080 Ti. I'm not going to bore you with the rest of these numbers because as you can see, they are pretty much identical and within the margin of error. And once again, we see that the cards are essentially performing the same in game. Not to bore you too much, here is the 1440p Ultra slide, and you can take a look and see once again that they all perform about the same on mins, averages, and max. But wait, is one better at 4K? No. The only significant difference we've seen in any of the games so far, or any of the tests I did, was in Rise of the Tomb Raider at 1080p with very high settings, where the max FPS and the min FPS was significantly better on the Titan X Pascal. Now, there could be a few different reasons for this, and I did go back and test this game multiple times because there were a lot of interesting things going on, and this seemed to be pretty consistent, so I'm confident that I can say that the Titan X Pascal does appear to have a little bit more GPU horsepower than at least the 1080 Ti, and we can see it here where the mins are about 10 FPS more than they are on the GTX 1080 Ti for the Titan X, and we can see that we have a max that's also better. The average is a little bit better with about 5 FPS gain, but it's definitely that min I would focus on, and having that 10 extra FPS puts you over that 60 FPS kind of awesomeness where you don't have to worry about dropping below 60, at least at 1080p for Rise of the Tomb Raider. This starts to go away as we bump the resolution up to 1440p with very high settings, and now we're within that kind of margin of error where both of these cards are performing almost exactly the same. And of course in 4K we see that it's once again pretty much performing exactly the same. So final thoughts, guys. I had to make this video essentially because I already was making it and I didn't want to just have all this fun footage and then work on these charts and not come out with a video. I did feel like it was kind of a useless video to a certain extent because this is stuff we already knew, and if you're going to pick up a card for gaming, obviously you're going to want to save the $500, maybe put that towards a Ryzen chip. And go ahead and go with the 1080 Ti. It seems to be the sweet spot for the 4K gaming now. And finally, the Titan X Pascal has been dethroned as the only option for 4K 60Hz gaming. This is good news for me because I definitely want a cheaper option to have laying around to sell, 4K gaming to my friends and family, of course, because now we're at that point to where it's not so ridiculous that you would say, oh yeah, 4K is just ridiculous, don't do it. It's enough there, and we have enough games coming out that are supporting HDR as well. So this is kind of the only way to get that HDR 4K 60Hz experience in the living room as well as in the office. For pure horsepower, obviously we can see in very few cases that the Titan X Pascal does come out ahead, but not significantly enough for you to justify the extra $500 purchase. And with the option of, you know, third-party manufacturer coolers on the 1080 Ti, we're probably going to see even better performance coming from the 1080 Ti options down the road. I would assume that when you start getting those Gaming X editions from MSI and those awesome Strix editions from ASUS, that we're going to have 1080 Ti's outperforming the Titan X Pascal, no problem. Now, there is the issue of the Titan XP. Yes, they called it the XP. And I want to pick one up. I will try to get my hands on one for some testing. And we'll have to see if the performance improvement over the 1080 Ti justifies the new $1,200 King from the Green Team. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe down below. And let me know what you guys think about the 1080 Ti. Let's discuss the Titan XP too, because fuck, what the hell, Nvidia? I barely had the Titan X Pascal for that long. I guess that's the way technology works though. So what are you gonna do? Until next time, I'll see you next Tuesday.